This is the 2019-2020 Assessment Manual Update webinar. Some of these, there's not a whole lot of changes to the assessment manual this year, so some of this is just review to make sure that everybody knows. But these are the currently NRS approved ABE assessments for North Carolina. And they are approved through different dates, which I've said in several webinars, and it's also listed in the assessment manual. And I should point out that at the bottom of every slide right here, I have told you where you can find this information in the assessment manual if you want to read it. So CASAS Math Goals is approved through March 6, 2022. TABE 11 and 12 through September 7th, 2024. CASAS Reading Goals through February 5th, 2025. And the reason that these are different dates is because they are given a 7-year approval from NRS from when they were submitted or when they were initially approved. So that's why TABE is until 2024, CASAS is in 2025, and then that doesn't make sense for math goals because we all know that that was just approved a few months ago in May, I think. CASAS math goals didn't get a full approval. They got conditional approval, so it can be used, but NRS wanted them to change some things before it gets a full approval. So it's expected to eventually get a 7-year approval also. The ESL assessments that are approved by NRS for North Carolina they're all the same ones you've been using for years. Nothing has changed, and they're approved through February 2nd, 2021, which is Best Lit and Best Plus 2.0, CASAS Life and Work Listening, CASAS Life and Work Reading, and the TABE Class E. These ESL assessments are all being reworked right now as we speak and are being submitted to NRS for new approval. Sometime after February 2021, we will be using, or hopefully before then, we'll be using new ESL assessments. But for the time being, we're still using the same ones. And from what I understand, NRS sent them all back to the drawing board recently, or at least gave them some feedback and said that they have to make some more changes before any of them can be approved. So I don't really know what that means, how different these will be, but I suspect that there will be differences from what we're used to. And now we're just, the slides sometimes will seem disjointed. They're just information, and I'm actually kind of going through the assessment manual if you have it in front of you. We're on page 14 now, and the changes that were made in the assessment manual are all highlighted in yellow, but if you've looked at them, you've already noticed that a lot of it is, maybe I rewrote something I didn't like how it was written grammatically, or just changed a word. I had to add TABE 11, 12, and CASAS Math and Goals, Math and Reading Goals in lots of different places. So those are all highlighted in yellow, but that's not really a change to talk about. So this is on page 14. Local providers are required to keep and maintain a database of all trained NRS test administrators. This is something that I've had questions about, and this isn't new. This has always been in the assessment manual, at least for a long time, but just a reminder. The database the providers keep must include the date of the administrator's initial training, as well as the dates of all subsequent refresher trainings. I was responsible for doing this at Wake Tech and at Central Carolina for the best tests, and the easiest thing was just to have an Excel spreadsheet with a list of names, and then across the top when they were initially trained and each time that they got a refresher training, which is required every 2 years. Instructors and NRS assessments. I think probably everybody in here is aware of this, but this was a big change in this year's assessment manual, that instructors may not administer assessments to their own students. And this policy covers all assessments given in North Carolina, TABE, CASAS, and BEST. Entering data into the database. Testing data must be entered into Colleague and LACIS no less than weekly. This information is also found on page 28. This is also not new. It's actually mentioned a couple times in the assessment manual. but that's just a reminder. Why have the assessments become more rigorous? In 2014, I think, NRS revised the level descriptors, and the test manufacturers were required by NRS to increase the rigor of their assessments in order to match the new level descriptors. And I often have shown a slide that gives you an example of an old descriptor, which was just 1 or 2 sentences, and now the descriptions are a page or 2 or 3 of small print for each level. So they go into much more detail. Whoops. If you would like to look at them, there's about 50 pages in Appendix B of the Technical Assistance Guide for Performance Accountability under WIOA. It's a manual that OCTAE publishes that's on the web, and there's a link to it in this webinar, which I'm happy to send to everybody after the meeting, after the webinar today, where you can go and read the descriptors yourself. CASAS goals scale scores. So this is new information in the assessment manual. There's a slight difference on my screen from what the assessment manual said, because I have figured out over the past few months that on the last level, in the assessment manual, it says, so if we look at CASAS reading goals, high adult secondary education level 6, it says 249 and up. I've figured out that you can't get higher than a 262. So it says 262 now. Technically 263, but I'll explain that on the next slide. And the same thing for math goals, adult secondary level. It says 236 and up, but the highest score you can actually get is 249 or 250. So these are the highest scores the assessment manual says, or these are the actual highest scores, and I will correct that. I have corrected it, but that new assessment manual hasn't been uploaded yet. The only correction. So now we're going to talk about, this is something I've had lots of questions about, and especially with the colleges and colleague, there have been questions about the CASAS goals asterisk and black diamond scores. I'm going to give you the official CASAS vague definitions of these. So the CASAS manual explains the black diamonds and the asterisks this way. The asterisk is an inaccurate score. The student scored too low on the test to receive a scale score, and instruction is recommended prior to retesting the student. The black diamond says, conservative estimate. For a pretest, student scored too high. CASAS recommends retesting with the next assigned test. I think that these are very wishy-washy descriptions, and that when we're writing policy, we need to have very clear understanding of what the black diamond and the asterisks mean in North Carolina. So here is the North Carolina definitions. The asterisk is an invalid score. It's really all I changed is what we're calling it in black, in bold. They wrote the student scored too low on the test to receive a scale score, and in North Carolina, you're required to pretest again using a lower test form or a different test. And it's similar for the black diamond. It's also an invalid, specifically an invalid pretest score. The student scored too high for the pretest, and the student must be retested with the next assigned test, which, if you're giving this as a pretest and they score the black diamond on the top level, that means the next assigned test doesn't exist unless you use TABE. But you can't, this student cannot improve from that score. So you have to give them a TABE or just use their reading versus their math score. The black diamond scores don't count at all for a pretest. And I think the next screen explains this more. So here's the black diamond score info from colleague, and this is the same for LACES. If we have anybody, is April on here? My providers, I only have one CBO. I don't see April. So the black diamond score colleague info. These are the top scores able to be recorded in colleague for CASAS math and reading goals. The top score is 249. 250 is Black Diamond for math. The top reading score is 262. Black Diamond is 263. If a student scores above 249 or 262 on a pretest, this is an invalid score, and the student must be retested on a different test. If a student scores a 250 or 263 on a post-test, a score of 249 or 262 should be recorded in colleague. So that is the highest score. There's no difference for EFL games between a 262 and a 263 or a 249 and a 250. So the easiest way to make sure we don't unintentionally record an invalid pretest, colleague has been programmed not to accept a score higher than 249 or 262. There's a number of you on this call that I think I've already talked about this with. TABE Class E scale scores. When reporting reading and writing separately, this is something that I put in specifically for Nicole Worley at Sandhills. She pointed out to me last year that the assessment manual was missing the scores if you wanted to report TABE Class E reading and writing separately, or TABE Class E speaking and listening separately. In the assessment manual, it already had how to record them together, but some providers may want to give a reading test and not a writing test, and Colleague was already programmed to do this. Colleague's always been programmed to do this since we've had TABE Class E. If you don't want to give them as a combined score or as a combined test, you can report them separately. And this information is now in the assessment manual. There's not big changes in the assessment manual that you don't already know. We all know that this was a year with lots of changes because of the new tests, but everybody's aware of those. So you're just learning about these not so big changes. This is exciting if you haven't looked at the assessment manual yet. We have approved 8 additional distance ed clock time software programs. They're the ones I've highlighted in yellow. So the ones that are not highlighted were approved already. We now have added Achieve or Spark 3000, Common Core Achieve Online, Connect Ed, Essential Ed, which I think might be everybody's favorite program in North Carolina. I had a lot of requests for that. Key Train, Learning Upgrade, New Readers Press Online, and PACS and Focus. And hopefully there will be even more next year, although I haven't heard of any others. Nobody has submitted any other software programs to be approved in a while. Newly approved Proxy Hour Distance Ed program. So this is I unveiled this at the Performance Partnership. You've probably mostly heard about this. Alamance created this wonderful correspondence type course called GED in the Community. It has been redesigned by Alamance, Jen Knox and her team, and is now approved as HSE in the Community. Mostly because of trademark issues. So we're calling it HSE in the Community now. And if you would like help or guidance on implementing HSE in the community, you can contact Jennifer Mock at Alamance Community College. She's very happy and willing to help people get going with it. They're actually in the process of writing a guide for using HSE in the community at your college. It's a beautiful program that they spent many hours creating that looks like it was produced by a publisher, but they produced it in-house. We're not going to go into all the details of this because it's very thorough, but one of the first things I noticed when I got to the system office was that we require proxy hour studies if you want to use something that does not have a built-in clock, but we didn't actually give much guidance on how to do a proxy hour study. So I read everything I could find about it and wrote some sections with step-by-step guidelines on completing a proxy hour study on page 42 and 43. There's a list of 16 items that must be submitted with a proxy hour report. The first step is to contact me. That's so that I can help you as you set up your proxy hour study, and also because I envision some of the smaller programs probably can't do a proxy hour study accurately by themselves, but if we had more than one program working on it, you could do a proxy hour study together. It's all designed to help you get more distance ed opportunities created if that's what you desire to do. So I did an assessment presentation last Tuesday at the new director's orientation here in Raleigh, and I had to create it was a different PowerPoint because it was more of an upper level, this is what assessment is for people who might not know. And they submitted questions before their training that I responded to. And I thought I would just include a few of those questions with this training. So the first question was, when should students be post-tested? Which seems like a simple answer, but it's a little bit complicated, particularly because we're a state that lets you use any assessment you want, and they all have different rules. So the answer is that students should be post-tested based on the test manufacturer's recommendation of numbers of hours of attendance. And that's different for every test. Each assessment has a different recommended number of hours for post-testing. The Best Lit and the Best Plus, it's 80 to 100 hours, which is only used, as far as I know, at Wake Tech in Central Carolina. Coincidentally, or maybe not so coincidentally, the colleges I was at. But so none of you need to worry about Best Lit and Best Plus. CASAS is the recommended number is 70 to 100 hours. TABE 11 and 12 is 50 to 60. And TABE Class E is 60 to 95. So even within the same publisher, the TABE Class E recommends more hours for ESL students. So the obvious next question is, can students be post-tested before they reach the recommended number of hours of attendance? And I think you probably all know the answer to that. The answer is yes. All of the test manufacturers have a different minimum number of hours of attendance students must reach before post-testing. The recommended number is the number that they have determined is when you will most likely see a gain. So really, you need to do everything you can to wait until the recommended number of hours to post-test. But there is this loophole that allows you to post-test somebody before the recommended number of hours. It's called the minimum number of hours. It's meant to be used in exceptional circumstances. So what is an exceptional circumstance, you ask? I think an exceptional circumstance is that somebody is moving back to their country, or that someone has told you that they cannot continue in your program, but they have the minimum number of hours. This is an exceptional circumstance. I don't think an exceptional circumstance is to have a policy that you test everyone after 40 hours. I think it's not even in your best interest to do that for getting MSG gains or EFL gains. And these are the minimum number of hours. Best Lit and Best Plus is 60. CASAS is 40. I think we all knew that. TABE 11 and 12 is 40 hours. And TABE Class E is 50. We might not all know that. TABE Class E is 10 more hours than the rest of the TABE tests. Can students be post-tested before they reach the minimum number of hours of attendance? That is a solid no. The minimum number of hours is the exception. So if they only have 30 hours, they cannot be post-tested. Students may not be post-tested until they have reached the minimum number of hours required by the test manufacturers. Is there any data about how other states are doing with the new CASAS and TABE tests for the ABE ASE students? The simple answer is that there's not really any data on CASAS's goals series yet, because it's really brand new. TABE 11 and 12 has been around for over a year before we started to use it. So there are states sharing their opinions on, and DRC, the creator of TABE, has some data. Most of you know that, you should all know, that TABE reduced the number of allowed hours for the test. That's based on the data they have that students did not require as many hours or as many minutes as they initially expected. there are a few threads that I follow on links about new assessments, and I will send you this link to the links assessment group, where you can read what other state directors and program directors are saying about TABE and CASAS.